Good morning, everyone. We're just going to give another minute to allow people to keep coming in. Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Public Interest Environmental Law Conference. Thank you for coming to our panel titled Patriarchy and Capitalism, Solutions to Two Systems of Oppression Hurting People and Wildlife. My name is Carly Buchanan, and I'm a PILC volunteer, and I'll be moderating this panel. I just have a few announcements, and then we'll get started. Don't worry if you can't see yourself. This is a Zoom webinar, so all the attendees are automatically muted with videos off, so you will only be able to see the panelists. Throughout the panel, if you have a question, please use the Q&A function rather than the chat function. All of our panelists will be giving their presentations, and then there will be a 15-minute Q&A session at the end where the panelists will answer your questions. Please remember to be curious of all viewpoints throughout the presentation and the Q&A session. Additionally, if there are any legal professionals in the audience wanting to earn CLE credit, for many of the PILC events, we will be sharing a link with instructions on how to register for CLE credits. Also, our alumni board, Friends of Land, Air, Water, helps to provide stipends for students doing unpaid public interest environmental law internships. If you are interested in making a donation to help provide students with those stipends, information to do so will be on a Google document, which will also be shared in just a moment. Lastly, the University of Oregon is located on Calapooya-Ilihi, the traditional indigenous homeland of the Calapooya people. Following treaties between 1851 and 1855, Calapooya people were dispossessed of their indigenous homeland by the United States government and forcibly removed to the Coast Reservation in Western Oregon. Today, descendants are citizens of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde Community of Oregon and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians of Oregon, and continue to make important contributions in their communities at UO and across the land we now refer to as Oregon. PILC would like to acknowledge the traditional homelands of the Calapooya peoples in the Willamette Valley and express our respect for the tribal nations of Oregon. I will now introduce our panelists. Kelly Jennings is a campaigner with the Center for Biological Diversity, where she develops and executes campaigns focused on rights-based solutions from voluntary family planning to the solidarity economy. She holds a bachelor's degree in natural resources from NC State and a master's degree in public health from the University of South Florida. Sarah Bailey, population and sustainability organizer, leads outreach efforts to help people understand how the pressures of our growing human population and high levels of consumption hurt wildlife and habitat. She manages the Endangered Species Condoms project and coordinates events for PillowTalk. Sarah holds a bachelor's in wildlife conservation from the University of Delaware, a master's in biology from Villanova University, and a master's of public administration from the University of Arizona. Adoma Haddo is a senior at Yale University studying environmental studies and a population and sustainability associate with the Center for Biological Diversity. At the center and beyond, Adoma's research focuses on waste communications, advocacy for sexual and reproductive health rights, and the systemic injustices associated with unequal environmental burdens and unequal access to health services. So I'll pass it off to the panelists.
All right, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with everybody today about patriarchy and capitalism. So my pronouns are she and her, and for those that are unable to see me today, I'm a petite, or could be said short, white, middle-aged woman with long brown hair standing in my office. I too want to acknowledge that I'm on stolen Seminole, Timucua, and Muscogee land where many individuals face displacement and suffering and hope one day they receive restorative measures. My fellow panelists will introduce themselves further when they take the virtual stage. Okay, I think our PILC tech folks are going to show a poll now. So before we started, we wanted to get a feeling for who is on this webinar. Hey, I see it pop up here. All right, so are you academia, an attorney, lawyer, community organizer, an interested citizen, nonprofit staff, student, or other? And you can check all that apply, I hope. We will keep this up for a little bit just to see what people think. And we will let you all close it when you think it's the right time and hopefully share the results with us.
We have about 68% of answers in right now. I can leave it up for a couple more minutes and then I'll read them out.
Leave it up for a couple more seconds. People are probably multitasking and not getting to their computer. I know that's how I
Yeah, so we have 8% in academia, 23, oh, it just changed. I think we got another answer. 7% in academia, 20% attorney or lawyer, 20% community organizer, 40% interested citizen, 7% nonprofit staff, 20% student, and 13% other.
Awesome, thank you.
Oh, maybe you can see it now. Oh, share results. There, now you can see it.
Oh, awesome. Okay, so interested citizen, all right. Everybody, I hope, is an interested citizen, along with wearing some of these other hats. Okay, well, that was really, really helpful. Okay, so for just a quick introduction about the center, we're a national nonprofit conservation organization that works through a combination of science, the law, activism, and creative media to protect wildlife in the wild places they need to thrive. And on the screen, you're seeing all of our different programs. So I wanted to just kind of ground us a little bit with a background. So, really we are dealing with overlapping crises and drivers. So while wildlife extinctions and climate change continue to rise due to the pursuit of endless growth. So hopefully you're seeing that with these little charts on the screen here. But there are nearly 8 billion people on the planet today, and 50 years ago, there were about half as many. And more people means more consumption, which is currently what drives our economy, albeit the dual crises also. So we're also showing population and GDP growth on this slide, which have very similar curves. So endless growth destroys habitat, pollutes our environment, and changes our climate. And while we have to stop using fossil fuels, transform what we eat, and hold corporations accountable, we also need to be more aware of how individual population pressure is involved. Okay, so to make this a little interactive for you all, we've created a survey that you can complete while listening to the presentation. And you kind of want to just keep it up, but not click through until we tell you to click through. So a way to get to this is you can take your phone, and if you have a QR code app, or maybe just you bring it up with your camera app, you can hover it over the QR code here and the survey will pop up and you can take it on your phone. Or we have a short URL here that you could type in to get to it. So it's bit.ly/3m7, I hope that's a capital L, little h, z, and p, little h, little z, little p. But I think we may try to also put this in the Q&A so people could go there. But if you can't, you've got a couple of different ways. So you are welcome to listen to me, look at my slides, and take this survey all at the same time. I know I'm asking a lot here. There'll be just a few questions at the beginning, and then pause. And then Sarah will come back and she'll have a few questions in this same link for her section, and then the evaluation will also be in here. So hopefully that was enough information to get folks going on this. Okay, so even though the United States does have a low fertility rate, every child born here has an outsized impact on the planet. The United States is 5% of the world's population, but uses 30% of all resources, creates 30% of all waste, and emits 15% of the world's carbon emissions. And the average American has an environmental footprint 60% larger than most Europeans and nearly 700% larger than the average person in most African countries, which is what we're showing here on the screen today. So I don't need to tell this audience about the current and future impacts of climate change, be that sea level rise, wildfires, or extreme heat. And I was just on the youth panel listening to them before this, and they said the same thing, right? Those affected will be the ones who haven't been responsible for the greenhouse gas emissions, but deal with the disproportionate impact or burden of an unjust polluting system. Sorry. So climate change impacts a wide range of health outcomes. This slide illustrates the most significant climate change impacts, their effects on exposures, and the subsequent health outcomes that can result from these exposures, be that heat-related illnesses, vector-borne disease, asthma, allergies, malnutrition, or even mental health. Interestingly, public sentiment also sees these issues as critical. Through a large national survey that we conducted, we learned that over 60% of people believe the climate crisis is very or critically important, just behind healthcare. So you can see that these two things are very related, both in personal perceptions, but also, on the ground, we're seeing that they're connected. So our philosophy is a win-win-win solution that empowers people, improves resilience and health outcomes, and reduces pressure on wildlife and the environment. When we talk about population pressure, we take a human rights lens, and it's done with justice and equity in mind. And we look to support people and the planet. But let's be clear, the center denounces any type of population control, coercion, eco-fascism, genocide, eugenics, or closing of borders. So Project Drawdown lists education of women and girls and access to family planning as top climate change solutions, similar to the solutions for the extinction crisis. Women with more years of education have fewer and healthier children, actively manage their reproductive health. Educated girls realize higher wages and greater upward mobility. So if you have the opportunity and you're not familiar with Project Drawdown, I would recommend checking this out. So when I turn it over to my colleagues, we'll be talking about solutions to overcome these overlapping oppressions noted on this slide. There's a lot going on here. I'm not going to go through it. Solutions that support people and the planet are going to be highlighted. Solutions that address the extinction and climate crises, and solutions that move us away from endless growth will all be discussed. So now I'm going to turn it over to Sarah, and I will just switch slides when you tell me to, Sarah.
Sounds good. Thanks, Kelly. Hi, my name is Sarah Bailey. I'm a Population and Sustainability Organizer at the Center for Biological Diversity. My pronouns are she, her, and I am on Wenhojren land in Western New York, also known as Buffalo, New York. And for those who cannot see me, I am an average height cis woman, white woman with brown hair, brown eyes, sitting in my home office. Next slide. So we have another interactive question for you. So if you're already in the form and have made it to the link, you can just click next. And if not, you can use your camera to open the QR code or type in the short URL. It is http://bit.ly/3M70HZP. And I believe we're going to be asking you about your opinions on healthcare access. Okay, yeah, we're just moving on. So to dive in to the patriarchy element of this, I really just wanted to highlight this paper I came across maybe in the last year or two. but it's like nearly 20 years old. It's called Two Pills, Two Paths, A Tale of Gender Bias. And it's a relatively short paper, about 4 pages. And it just gives an overview of the treatment of Viagra, the erectile dysfunction drug, and the pill, the well-known oral contraceptive. And without, going into all of it, just overall, oral contraceptives have not received as much funding, attention, and marketing resources as Viagra has. So this goes in terms of research and development, the approval and promotion, celebrity endorsements and commercials, and overall, Viagra has comparatively fewer users overall. So even if you were to say like, well, lots of people need it, that's not exactly what's happening to give Viagra lots of attention. So the paper makes the, makes the case that the contrast in treatment across many institutions and processes indicates it's merely more than coincidental. It is suggested the difference is caused by underlying biological and evolutionary needs for men to control female reproduction. And while evolutionary theory can help explain human motives, biology should not be used as an excuse or moral guide. So I just thought this was really cool perspective to kind of give some background on this. Next slide. And in terms of access, I'm going to reference the same survey that Kelly mentioned earlier. One of the questions there was in regards to the accessibility of birth control. And overwhelmingly, the majority of people, around 80%, agree that all types of birth control should be legal, free, and easily accessible. But people also realize that this access is disproportionate and recognize that immigrants, people of color, and other marginalized communities disproportionately lack access to healthcare, with about, I think almost 70% agreeing with that statement. And next slide. And this is another graphic to demonstrate this disparity in access. So this is a map put together by the group Power to Decide, and it maps contraceptive access, what they call contraceptive deserts. So what we have here is a map of the United States. You can see this outlines by state and then further broken down by county. And the way to read this map is the pink areas are indicating almost no access. So that county will have no publicly funded healthcare centers that offer all forms of modern contraception. So the hot pink is ostensibly bad. Going to the more neutral colors is, middle, and then dark purple, going from light to dark purple is good. So you can see there's just only some huge chunks where there is a lot of lack of access. And I mean, some even these hot pink counties are quite large. So this could have, create a rather large barrier in terms of transportation to access contraception. So just noting how that is, access, is not evenly spread across the United States. And there are about 20 million women living in contraceptive deserts in the United States. So again, if you wanted to look at that further, and you can click further down into the counties, see what your local area is like. If you Google Power to Decide contraceptive deserts, you'll be able to find that pretty easily. Next slide. And another aspect of this is sex education in the United States, which is also not in great shape here. And only 32 states and the District of Columbia mandate sex education, and only 18 states of that require the content to be medically accurate. And in case anyone thought this was like on the upswing and getting better, it's not. Young people today are less likely to receive instruction on key sex education topics than they were nearly 25 years ago. And what this can lead to is the fact that nearly half of all pregnancies in the US are unintended. So when you pair this lack of education with the access to actual resources to prevent unplanned pregnancies, that is what that looks like. And I've joked about this movie, but it is unfortunately relevant. This clip from Mean Girls: don't have sex because you will get pregnant and die. And if you'd like to find any of, dive in further into any of those statistics, most of those stats came from Guttmacher and Sekas. And the stat about sex ed not improving in the last 25 years is from a paper that's cited in the bottom right corner. Next slide. So what are we doing at the center? Our goal is to bring population, along with solutions like access to healthcare and education, back into the environmental conversation. And that is by focusing on ethical, non-coercive solutions. And we do this through our Endangered Species Condoms project, which I believe these have been given out in person at conferences in the past. What they look like is little packets like this, about the size of a pack of gum, with cute endangered species and funny rhymes. This one says, when you're feeling tender, think about the hellbender. And you open it up inside to get more information and a pair of condoms. So our goal with this is to give people information, a humorous icebreaker to start that conversation, and a literal tool to prevent unplanned pregnancies. We also have our PillowTalk outreach program, which I'll discuss a little further, which is where we pair with zoo and museum audiences to reach an age-appropriate audience who likes wildlife to further get this message out there. And we have a nationwide network of volunteers giving out the condoms. We gave away 40,000 for Valentine's Day this year. And we give these out on campuses, to coalitions, at conferences, when they're in person, environmental education centers. We also do media, public events, and survey and focus groups. So next slide. I just like to always show all the little critters because they're cute and they're fun. So we've got For the Sake of the Horned Lizard, Slow Down, Love Wizard. I already read the Hellbender one. Fumbling in the Dark, Think of the Monarch. Wrap with Care, Save the Polar Bear. Before It Gets Any Hotter, Remember the Sea Otter. And Can't Refrain, Remember the Whooping Crane. Next slide. We also incorporated a few different designs of Spanish language condoms a few years ago, so we can further get the message out. And I am really bad at Spanish, so I will not make you suffer through that. But the translations equal Protect the Wolf, Covering It All, and that's a Mexican red wolf. Save the vaquita, Don't sow your seeds, and vaquitas are a small endangered porpoise. And then we have the monarch and the polar bear. So cover your thing, protect the butterfly, and save the bear, put on your hat. Next slide. So I briefly mentioned PillowTalk. So how PillowTalk works is that we send the endangered species condoms along with some activity materials to address the consumption side of things to zoos and museums we decide to partner with. So we reach out when we see events that look like they'd be a good fit. Again, these are adult only, usually after hours events. And usually, also we'll get outreach from them once they hear about us, once we start partnering. The activities we have help people understand their individual consumption and environmental footprint. So that's how we're also tying in the consumption side of things with population itself. And we're able to train local center supporters to volunteer at these events, again, when more in-person events are happening. And it's a great way for visitors to learn a valuable new conservation action that combats climate change. It's fun. Safe sex is a fun activity to do. Next slide. And over the last 3-4 years now, we've partnered with 45 different institutions that include natural history museums, aquariums, science centers, nature centers, and zoos. And we've been able to participate in over 120 events, and through that be able to engage with thousands of visitors. So we're always looking for new community partners and institutions to partner with. So if you have any ideas, let us know. We love finding new events and people to work with. Next slide. And just some other outreach that we have going on. Last year, we launched our Girl Scout patch program. So we have 2 patches that fall within the broader Eco Advocate and Eco Explorer badges. Fun thing I learned, badges are nationally sanctioned, patches are locally developed. So these meet the requirements for nationally recognized badges, but girls also earn our specially designed Healthy People, Healthy Planet patch and Conscious Consumer patch. So I have led these with my local Girl Scout Council in Western New York for their high school age Girl Scouts. So I actually had to do Healthy People, Healthy Planet virtually when they were not meeting in person. And that went really well. While we're not quite giving out condoms to them, that's not quite the purview of Girl Scouts at this current time. We do talk about impacts of number of people on the planet, how we can consume a little more carefully, choices we can make, and how it's important to have women in leadership roles and how that can lead to more progressive environmental change. The Conscious Consumer patch goes over, that's a little more succinct, how to consume more consciously. So we talk about kind of individual actions, but broader systemic things we can advocate for as well. We also have the Contraception Conversation interview series on our YouTube channel, where I interview a series of people, usually 3 to 4, about their experience with a specific contraception form, to kind of put a face to it and let people share their individual stories to help normalize these conversations. And then we have our Crowded Planet Research Database, where I've compiled lots of literature across many disciplines about the impacts of human population growth on the environment and wildlife, with nice brief little summaries and downloadable resources when we're able to offer that. Next slide. So to sum it up, how family planning can save wildlife. Kelly's going to click through and little things are going to get added as we go. So first thing, there we go. When we have all forms of contraception available, that is going to help reduce unplanned pregnancies, which is also going to lead to lower fertility rates. Next. This will increase the empowerment of women and girls with the improved access to contraception, reproductive health care, and education. Women and girls can choose to delay having children or have smaller families. Next. Which is going to help us leave more room for wildlife. Population pressure pushes wildlife out of their homes and closer to extinction. Reducing unplanned pregnancies helps leave more food and water and shelter for wildlife to thrive. And next. And this is going to help us build resilience. When people are able to make the right reproductive decisions for themselves, the benefits to their health, families, and the environment help build resilient communities. And I believe we're on to Adoma next.
Thanks so much, Kelly and Sarah. My name is Adoma. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm currently on Quinnipiac land. For those of you who can't see me, I am a Black woman with glasses and shoulder-length Black hair. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about our research into alternative economies in response to the systems of oppression that harm both people and planet that Sarah and Kelly were alluding to. But before we get into that, I do know we have a poll. Hopefully this works. So the question, I don't know, yeah, there we go. Are you familiar with any of these choices? And if you can see on the slide, we have community-supported agriculture, credit unions, mutual aid, land trusts, little free libraries, and worker cooperatives. I'll give you a moment to click through those.
Dun, 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 dun.
We have about 61% who have
Awesome.
participated so far. So let me know when you want to close it.
I think we can close it out. Let's see.
Okay, we got 71% now.
Oh, perfect. Oh, awesome. It looks like the majority of you are familiar with credit unions, land trusts, community-supported agriculture. Lots of diversity of knowledge here. Very, very fascinating. Hopefully by the end of this, you'll know a couple more of these and ways to get involved with them as well. All right, so next slide, please. Okay, a recurring theme throughout this presentation has been the ways in which larger systems of inequality and injustice create disproportionate health and environmental burdens for different communities. The issues of these disproportionate burdens relating to class, race, gender, and environment really encouraged us to investigate pathways to a just transition, considering the systemic and individual changes that would be necessary to dismantle systems of oppression and empower communities that have been harmed historically by economic and political structures of racialized capitalism. While it may seem that our present system ingrained with inequality is just the way things are, the visions of a just transition exist, and a just transition for all is possible and necessary. Next slide, please. All right, so recognizing the manufactured inequalities inherent to racialized capitalism, we created a framework, as you can see here, with alternative economic transformations necessary for a radical reimagining of our present system, all pictured here on this infographic. So all the dimensions you can see are overlapping, centered around this concept of post-capitalism. And here we consider post-capitalism as a model that recognizes the systems of oppression upon which extractive economic growth, endless growth, as Kelly was mentioning, was founded really intertwined with racism and patriarchy. In response, this framework proposes a series of economic transformations for a world founded on gender, racial, environmental, and economic justice. I want to say these transitions are by no means all of the necessary steps to the problem at the scale of our present systems of oppression. However, each of these dimensions really intersect and overlap and suggest that all solutions to the systems of injustice must be inherently multidimensional, involving the voices and experiences of multiple people across multiple fields. So some of the themes, such as disability justice, for example, can't fit under just one category and really has a place under all of these categories, and also represents a key part in creating a system that is able to accommodate the needs of the present and the future. So over the next few slides, I'm going to be giving a high-level overview of the key alternative economies presented in this infographic, starting with gender justice. All right, so gender justice focuses on current patriarchal economic and social systems and how they perpetuate violence on the basis of gender. While different people might not experience gender justice in the same way, gender as it is upheld under present systems of oppression perpetuate harm against all people. In response to these burdens, the gender justice dimension, as you can see on the slide, involves advocacy for the care economy, which is centered around improving universal access to affordable health and social care services for all, regardless of ability, race, or income level. This also really demands a rethinking of gender roles and the expectations of gender. And within that, it involves addressing the wage gap, as well as the unmet need for family planning and parental leave. Next slide, please. So racial justice, as I sort of alluded to before, is founded on the recognition that of the present and past systems of violence perpetuated by the histories of capitalism and colonialism, which are in many ways ideologies that many present-day institutions were founded upon. So this racial justice dimension requires structural and cultural changes, such as wealth and power redistribution and reparations, as well as transformation of the way race and history are conceptualized through anti-racist education and advocacy. Racial justice is really a major part of a lot of these different dimensions. As I had mentioned before, they're all inherently intersectional, but this one in particular is just a way for us to articulate some of the future gains that we hope to see in racial justice. On to the next slide, please. Environmental justice. So environmental justice really puts waste extraction and other human interactions with the environment into a framework of disproportionate burdens and harms. The environmental justice dimension here proposes changes in the patterns of production and consumption through alternative economies such as the circular economy and the donut economy, which really focus on encouraging the elimination of waste and extending product life cycles for both climate and social goals. This is also aligned with the sharing economy, which really is aligned with redefining exchange on the local level, involving the cooperative exchange of goods and services and building community relations. So the next slide is the final dimension, which is economic justice. And economic justice here reflects a larger need for economic transformation involving livable wages and improved working conditions for all people. Additionally, this dimension would involve a transition towards more regenerative economies that counter the endless growth narrative that Kelly had mentioned before. And one strategy that we've really focused on, we really honed in on in our focus on economic justice transformation, as well as the other dimensions here, has been the solidarity economy, which highlights support for worker ownership, cooperatives, community land trusts, community supported agriculture, and many of the other examples that were presented in that poll earlier. The solidarity economy is really something that we want to focus on, and I'll talk a little bit more about it in our next slide. So the solidarity economy as a means for transformation involves many existing opportunities for engagement on the individual level. So as you can see on this slide, solidarity economy frames our current discussion of the just transition, and it really embodies many people-centric values such as solidarity and cooperation, reciprocity, altruism, and symbiosis, equity in all dimensions, including race, ethnicity, gender, class, ability, and so on, social and economic democracy, sustainability, as well as pluralism, really a commitment to a no one-size-fits-all solution and a no silver bullet solution. And so to consider the solidarity economy, we'd like to present two separate examples of concrete solidarity economy in practice. And I'll present that on the next slide, please. Right. So these two examples really are examples of worker-owned cooperatives in which workers have a stake in the management of the company. And I wanted to present some that really highlight community involvement and some that are, a little closer to home for folks at the University of Oregon. The first one is the City Bikes Cooperative in Portland, which is a worker-owned cooperative that embodies circular economy practices as well as community exchange, focusing on increasing access to bikes across the city of Portland. The second one is a part of the US Solidarity Economy Network, and it's the Garden Project, which is focused on community empowerment of domestic violence survivors for sustainable agriculture and food security. And it really encourages training courses and collaborative gardening. So these aren't just examples, these are real organizations, and there are likely many in your local community that you can support as well. For more information, we'll be sending out a series of links at the end of this presentation with a series of a directory of different examples of solidarity economy that might be in your local community. Next slide, please. All right. So thus far, we've considered many of the overlapping structural issues associated with current systems of oppression, including patriarchy, capitalism, and racism, conceptualizing some of the necessary transformations in response. So our proposal of a just post-capitalist transition highlights the need for equity and justice on all dimensions, ultimately creating solutions for both people and planet with improved resilience, as well as a healthier and thriving social and environmental systems. Thus far, we've really talked about the need for systemic transformations in more abstract terms, but there are real concrete solutions and objectives that require support on both the systemic and individual levels. So to start out with the systemic dimension, the overarching goal of the systemic transformation would be to create and empower existing alternative economic systems and communicate these larger transitions on the institutional level. And this could involve a variety of different measures, including through legislation, for example, transitioning away from single-use plastics with the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act. And the Center's Presidential Plastics Action Plan. This could also aligned with the circular economy, could involve implementing extended producer responsibility and providing logistical support for the private sector for circular business practices, and ultimately creating and incentivizing green jobs with livable wages and paid leave. On the individual level, we also want to focus on advocating for these alternative economic systems and supporting existing organizing. And this could include supporting worker-owned cooperatives in your local community, circular brands that you might know, investing in public banking and community supporting agriculture. It could also include continuing to share and raise awareness about local organizing and acting on supporting policies for climate action plans, green jobs, and labor reform. And you can find all of this and lots of information at the end of this presentation about how to get involved in your local community. And that's about it from now, for me, excuse me. I'll hand it back over to Kelly. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Adoma. Well, I opened us up. I have another example of solutions, and then I'm going to close this out here. So you just heard from Sarah and Adoma about these oppressive systems and some solutions. So I want to share one additional solution with you. The effects of rising greenhouse gas emissions are more harmful to women, gender diverse people, and Black, Indigenous, and people of color, although these communities contribute less to climate change. So as we've said, this underscores the need to include gender frameworks and gender diverse voices from communities of color into climate action planning. So the center sought to learn if gender frameworks were included in municipal climate action plans, which I'm now going to just shorten to CAPs. So 21 CAPs from cities across the United States were analyzed, representing approximately 10% of the US population. And climate action plans, if you're unfamiliar with them, are developed by an entity could be city, university, or other institutions that outline steps that have been and will be taken to combat the effects of climate change. Oftentimes, they include both mitigation and adaptation efforts. So on the screen, you're seeing here kind of what the difference is between mitigation and adaptation. And I apologize if this is remedial, but I always get these confused. So this is good for me. So mitigation efforts are preventative as they seek to lessen the effects of climate change by tackling issues at the source. Examples would be renewable energy or sustainable transportation. Adaptation efforts are reactive and try to adjust to current impacts of climate change as a way to reduce vulnerability to harm, such as disaster preparedness or infrastructure adjustments. So the pressure of population growth makes it harder to meet emission reduction targets while magnifying climate change's detrimental consequences on humans and other species. So while addressing population growth is a long-term mitigation strategy, there are also short-term adaptation benefits, including improved healthcare, empowerment, and other positive social outcomes. So you may see this as similar to Adoma's capitalism graphic. I really liked how she had created that. So we used it to define empowerment. And you can see these things are all interconnected, right? But so since our analysis looked for gender-based empowerment solutions, we kind of decided what they were in our mind. So these initiatives would include universal access to voluntary family planning, which Sarah talked about, LGBTQIA inclusive and culturally responsive sex education, which Sarah talked about, and affordable sexual and reproductive health care, which they've both talked about. So additional solutions would include supporting educational opportunities, redefining gender roles, which Adoma mentioned, creating equitable opportunities for women, and guaranteeing safety from harassment and violence. So this is kind of the world in which we were looking and trying to see, oh, well, do climate action plans include any of this? Because if you remember from the top, we talked about Project Drawdown listing education, education of women and access to family planning as top climate solutions. So unfortunately, none of the CAPs we reviewed mentioned family planning, contraception, reproductive health, and only one mentioned gender. So in addition to the 21 plans that were analyzed, 7 informal interviews were conducted with sustainability professionals who had worked or are currently working on climate action plans. And the following themes were identified from those discussions. So, my bad. Sorry, I'm still here. Gender empowerment solutions can be difficult to measure. The need for government approval can be a barrier to getting gender empowerment in these plans. It matters who's at the table, right? So having diverse views represented in the discussion and decision-making throughout the development is crucial. And the pandemic may offer some opportunity for more inclusive CAPs going forward. So based on the literature and our qualitative and quantitative analyses, we are recommending the following steps and policies be implemented at the local level or through state and federal level that can support local climate action plans. So 1, work within your existing CAP structures to address gender inequity as a public health issue. 2, collect relevant data related to gender, race, and climate change. 3, educate and train government staff on gender inclusion and the climate crisis. And 4, create gender advisory committees. And then the final recommendation in the report was to build these better gender empowerment programs that mention sex ed, contraception access, keeping abortion legal, providing period products so kids stay in school, funding quality education programs, and addressing the racial inequality in schools. So, this stuff can happen here in the United States and needs to happen. So by implementing these practices, policymakers will be better able to create intersectional CAPs that support their communities, wildlife, and the planet. So exciting news, the full report was just put on our website Friday. So this is the first time that this has been shared publicly. So, feel good about yourself. But anyway, you can hopefully find the full report with a short link in the resources that we're going to share here, potentially that Sarah has shared in the Q&A. Okay, so in conclusion, today we talked about these overlapping systems of oppression that are driving both the extinction and climate crisis. We talked about the multiple solutions that can help overcome these deeply ingrained systems. We talked about how people and the planet are interconnected, and serving one another can serve the other. So we want to leave you with some new insight, some hope, which we can all use, some actions that you can take to really help decrease these detrimental impacts of patriarchy and capitalism. So first, always important to get involved in democracy, be that through advocating or voting. In fact, we have an action alert open right now that is being shared in the Q&A that advocates for abortion access. We discussed a number of oppressive systems, so continue to join the fight for justice. As Adoma mentioned, be that gender, racial, environmental, or economic. Work not only to change these systems, but your individual behavior. We do not get off the hook. We know that this stuff is inequitable, but do what you can, please. Support empowerment by signing up to distribute our Endangered Species Condoms. So now you know who's behind those condoms that are sent to you. So at the end, you're going to see Sarah's email, or you can request them in the evaluation survey thing along there. And then, help advocate for this just transition that Adoma was mentioning. We need 100% renewable energy. We need one that supports a sustainable food system, and one that's rooted in solidarity, as she said. And finally, we are looking for communities that are in the process of writing their climate action plans, or are updating their CAP, and would want to include some of this gender empowerment language into it. So again, please reach out to me if you want to work on that. And again, so if you want to tell us how this presentation was, if you want to give us any kind of feedback, if you want to request condoms, if you're working on your CAP, if you have any input for Adoma, please take this evaluation that's the same one that we've been talking about throughout the presentation, and let us know what you think. And we did throw a lot at you, so if you want to either take a picture of this on your with your camera on your phone, what are those things? Anyway, your phone camera, or take a screen capture right now while this is up. These are all the resources, but again, we were able to share them in the Q&A also. And then here are our emails. So we want to really thank you for this time. And I think we have a little bit, 10 minutes or so for Q&A. So I can leave this up for another minute. And then maybe, should I stop screen sharing? Carly, what do you think?
Yeah, if you want to go ahead and stop screen sharing, and then I think everyone can see you guys. And we can get started on Q&A. And if y'all have any questions, please put them in the little Q&A section and I'll read them out to our panelists. We do actually have a first question here. This individual says, while you were discussing the reproductive burden on women, I was thinking a lot about IUDs and how I've been hearing a lot of people recently commenting on how painful they are to be inserted, and how a lot of people think it's strange that there is no anesthesia given for that insertion. I was curious if you see that as another example of the reproductive health burden being on women, or maybe where that pain burden fits in.
I'll take this, and then I don't know, Sarah or Adoma, if you want to chime in. I'm going to share a personal story. So I got an IUD twice, and I come to find out have a small vaginal opening, and I got to go under anesthesia. And so it's very interesting for me to hear other people talk about the pain. And I feel horrible that I never encountered that. I mean, I'm happy, but horrible that I can't empathize with my fellow folks that had that happen. But I think this is one of those places where we just don't understand how our healthcare system works. And, you know, we should be able to ask for that. And it shouldn't be painful. And it should be covered by insurance. And it should be part of what's asked of you. You know, so I scream that and yell, you know, I would tell that to the mountaintop to say, ask for it. You know, if you start reading all that, ask for it, ask your provider. And I don't think it should just be, you know, somebody that had a small vaginal opening when they, you know, measured me or whatever, identified me as that individual. But Sarah, Adoma, I don't know, what do you think? I
can tap in. Yeah, I mean, I have also had to, I am fortunate that I didn't really have any outrageous reaction. But part of that, I mean, like ever so slightly, probably not to the degree of like needing to be like put under, given anything, but like talking to my friend about it, she recommended taking like ibuprofen ahead of time and just kind of like getting those and like I did feel a little lightheaded, but she told me ahead of time to pack a snack. So just like having those candid conversations with like trusted friends and family, I feel like is really beneficial. So like just that general openness can be beneficial. I guess there is still a burden to like have to know and share all that, like the stakes are kind of high. Alternatively, I'd encourage people with male reproductive systems who can get vasectomies to explore that, because despite that procedure being cheaper, easier, less invasive, less painful, there are still 3 times as many tubal ligations in the US. So I'd especially encourage people who can get that procedure to explore that. So perhaps their partners do not need to get IUDs.
Awesome. Okay, another question. Have you seen any correlation between a lack of access to health centers and lower sex education?
that has to have some sort of overlap, I would think. There would, I have not done it or seen it, but, or nothing's coming to mind, but I think you could take the contraceptive desert map that Sarah showed and overlay it with restrictive sex ed, some sort of restrictive sex ed map, which actually I did just find a restrictive sex ed map the other day, I feel like, but I have not seen them overlaid together. But that is a great question, and somebody has potentially done it and I'm just not familiar.
Okay. And this one is for Adoma. Can you clarify or expand on how the solidarity economy relates and interacts with racial and gender justice?
Yeah, for sure. So the solidarity economy really tries to focus on empowerment. And while we didn't cover the full breadth of solidarity economy in this presentation, in previous presentations that have focused like exclusively on solidarity economy, there is the majority of these worker-owned cooperatives and examples of like mutual aid, for example, do focus on issues such as reparations and the need for wealth redistribution. I remember summer of 2020, the push for mutual aid was pretty significant in response to a lot of the protests. And so these are examples that are of solidarity economy interacting with wider systems of politics and a lot of the international and local events that come up and ways that people can get involved, even if they're not quite aware that they're solidarity economy examples. Yeah, and in terms of gender, I would also argue that empowerment in gender is a significant part of the solidarity economy. And even in just one of the examples that I mentioned in the slide, the focus on domestic violence survivors is largely focused on women, although, you know, women are of course not the only victims of domestic violence. So those narratives and recognizing the need for empowerment is a crucial part of the many of the worker-owned cooperatives and systems that come up from solidarity economy.
Awesome, thank you. And I know y'all put some recommendations at the end of the presentation. Do you have any suggestions for the younger generation, maybe high school students or college students, on how they can really get involved further?
I'll pitch the condoms again. Yeah, a great place to give them out. Partner with your local, like your campus reproductive rights group, sustainability group, health center, to actually show students where the resources are. That's always going to be my pitch.
Yeah, I am currently a college student, and I think some of the best ways that I've gotten involved is working and supporting co-ops in my community. I live in New Haven, and so there are lots of different groups such as City Seed that focuses on urban farming. I volunteer at a local farm, which is super fun. So, there are lots of different ways if you really want to invest your time in your local community. I think starting with the community is the best way to do it.
That was a great question. I think similar to Adoma, just getting involved in what interests you, right? Finding an endpoint, and just to pitch the center, we actually have 2 open internship positions right now, if you were to go to our website, and then often work with volunteers also. So if you want a little bit of hands-on experience, reach out to any one of us.
Awesome, thank you guys. And I see we just have a couple minutes left, so we can just wrap it up here. Thank you guys so much for your time today. The panel was super informative. And someone just commented, it was a very interesting presentation and your work is very important. So thank you guys so much. And I hope everyone enjoyed it and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.